Imagine spending $2 billion building an aircraft so advanced, so completely invisible to radar, that your enemies essentially had to accept they could never shoot it down. That was the promise of the F-117 Nighthawk, and for over a decade, that promise held. 45 stealth aircraft, thousands of combat sorties, 0 losses. 0. The Nighthawk flew through the most sophisticated air defense systems on Earth and came home every single time. Military strategists were starting to believe stealth technology had genuinely broken the rules of aerial warfare forever. Then came the night of March 27, 1999, and a Serbian lieutenant colonel named Zoltán Dani, working with outdated Soviet-era equipment in a muddy field outside Belgrade, changed everything. This is not just a story about one plane getting shot down. This is a story about how one man's unconventional thinking defeated a $2 billion technological advantage, and what that tells us about the limits of any system we believe to be unbeatable. To understand what happened that night, you first have to understand what the F-117 Nighthawk actually was, and more importantly, what people believed it was. The Nighthawk entered service in 1983, developed in total secrecy by Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division. Its angular, almost alien design wasn't built for aerodynamic elegance. Every facet of that aircraft was engineered to deflect radar waves away from the source, scattering them in different directions rather than bouncing them back to the receiver. Radar works by sending out a signal and waiting for the echo. The Nighthawk was designed to produce almost no echo at all. At 65 feet long, it would appear on conventional radar as something roughly the size of a tennis ball. Think about that for a second. A 65-foot aircraft flying at hundreds of miles an hour, showing up as a tennis ball. By 1999, the F-117 had already flown in Panama, in the Gulf War, and in Bosnia. It had struck targets that no other aircraft could reach. It had flown right through integrated air defense networks that would have annihilated a conventional jet. The psychological effect of this was almost as powerful as the tactical effect. NATO commanders trusted it completely. Enemy air defense commanders knew, rationally, that they probably couldn't stop it. The Nighthawk had become something beyond an aircraft. It had become a symbol. And that is always exactly when a system becomes dangerous to rely on. Not when it fails, but when the people using it stop questioning whether it can. While NATO was celebrating the myth of the undetectable jet, Zoltán Dani was doing something far more valuable than celebrating anything. He was thinking. Dani was a lieutenant colonel in the Yugoslav Army's 3rd Battalion of the 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade. His primary weapons system was the Soviet-built SA-3 Neva missile, a system that first entered service in 1961. You read that right. Dani's missiles were designed almost 40 years before this engagement. Against a cutting-edge stealth aircraft, he was working with technology that was, by modern standards, ancient. But Dani was not thinking about his disadvantages. He was thinking about physics. Here's the key insight that Dani had and that most air defense commanders had either missed or dismissed. Stealth technology is not invisibility. It is a specific engineering solution to a specific problem: high-frequency radar detection. The F-117's angular surfaces and radar-absorbing materials were optimized to defeat the kinds of radar frequencies that modern surface-to-air missile systems typically used for targeting. High-frequency radar gives you precise targeting information. That's what you need to actually hit something. But it also happens to be exactly what stealth technology is best at defeating. Lower-frequency radar, the older kind, the kind that looks clunkier and less precise, operates on longer wavelengths. And those longer wavelengths interact very differently with an aircraft's surfaces. Dani had a P-18 early warning radar. It was old. It was imprecise. It threw up false returns from clouds and rain, filling the screen with noise. Most commanders wouldn't even consider using it as a targeting tool. But Dani had been running tests, running simulations in his mind, asking a question that nobody else seemed to be asking. What if the old radar can see what the new radar can't? He thought it could, and he had been waiting for the right night to prove it. Serbian intelligence knew the strikes were coming. NATO's air campaign against Yugoslavia, Operation Allied Force, had been running since March 24, 1999, and the patterns were becoming readable. Serbian spies reported that stealth aircraft would be operating that night. Dani knew something else too. He knew that effective stealth tactics relied heavily on predictability from the defender's side. The F-117 pilots flew planned routes. They used the same corridors. They followed mission profiles that were designed around the assumption that the enemy's radar couldn't see them. Overconfidence in any system tends to breed routine, and routine in warfare is a vulnerability. Dani made several tactical decisions in advance of the mission that proved critical. First, he moved his battery. Stealth aircraft missions were pre-planned, and NATO's intelligence on static Serbian air defense positions was good. Moving meant not being where the suppression missions expected him to be. Second, he imposed strict radar silence. He did not want to give the incoming aircraft or the American planes flying radar suppression missions alongside it any electronic signal to home in on. His battery would stay dark until the last possible moment. Third, and most critically, he decided he would use the P-18 low-frequency early warning radar to find and track the target, even though it wasn't designed for weapons guidance. He would use it to get a rough picture, and then he would wait for a moment, any moment, when the stealth aircraft's radar signature spiked enough for his SAM targeting radar to get a lock. He was essentially setting a trap, and on the night of March 27th, his quarry flew right into it. On the other side of this equation was Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Zelko, one of the most experienced F-117 pilots in the fleet. Zelko had flown combat missions before. He trusted his aircraft. He had reason to. That aircraft had never let anyone down. His mission that night was to strike the command center of the Serbian Air Force in Belgrade, a high-value target deep inside enemy territory. He was escorted initially by F-16 Vipers carrying anti-radiation missiles designed to lock onto and destroy any enemy radar that dared to activate. But as Zelko crossed into Serbian airspace, the weather turned. Low clouds, rain, turbulent conditions. The escorting Vipers were ordered back to base. The weather made their mission untenable. Zelko pressed on alone. That was the mission. The Nighthawk didn't need escorts in the conventional sense. Its entire protection was its invisibility. He flew low over the Serbian countryside, his aircraft's computers preparing the bombing run with mechanical precision. He was, by every reasonable calculation, a ghost, undetectable, untouchable. He hit his target. The bombs fell precisely as planned. The Belgrade command center was struck. Zelko pulled his aircraft up and began climbing. Mission complete, heading for home, already past the most dangerous moment. He was wrong about that last part. Down on the ground, Dani's P-18 had already been tracking a faint dot through the storm. His targeting radar had swept the sky repeatedly and found nothing. The stealth technology was doing its job. But Dani kept watching that dot on the early warning display, following its track, computing where it was going, waiting. And then Zelko opened his bomb bay doors. This is the physics moment that decided everything. An aircraft's radar cross-section, the measure of how visible it is to radar, is not constant. It changes based on viewing angle, on the aircraft's configuration, on whether doors or panels are open. The F-117's bomb bay, when open, presented a dramatically different radar profile than the closed aircraft. For a few seconds, the Nighthawk was significantly more visible than usual. Not fully visible, but enough. Dani's SAM targeting radar flickered, struggled, and then locked. 2 SA-3 missiles were fired in rapid succession. Zelko had already closed the bomb bay and was climbing, completely unaware. The first warning he had was the lock alert screaming in his cockpit, and almost simultaneously the visual of 2 missiles punching up through the cloud layer below him, accelerating toward his aircraft with terrible speed and purpose. He broke into evasive maneuvers immediately. He had no chaff. The Nighthawk carried none, because chaff would compromise its radar signature. Everything depended on his hands, his instincts, his skill. The first missile malfunctioned and screamed past his canopy close enough to be terrifying. The second one didn't malfunction. It detonated close enough to the left wing to send a cloud of shrapnel through it, and the entire left side of the Nighthawk came apart in a ball of orange fire. Zelko had about 3 seconds of controlled thought before the aircraft began its death spin. What happened next is a testament to training, adrenaline, and what can only be called extraordinary human will. The aircraft was spinning violently, throwing Zelko around in his harness, the G-forces pressing over 100 pounds of weight onto each of his arms. He fought 7 Gs, 7 times the force of gravity, to reach the ejection handles. He pulled. The canopy blew away. His seat rocketed him out into the dark, wet Serbian sky. For nearly 2 seconds, he was in free fall, strapped to the ejection seat, half-conscious, wondering in the back of his spinning mind whether the seat had malfunctioned. Then the parachute opened. The violence stopped. He was swinging quietly through the storm, watching his Nighthawk cartwheel away through the darkness below him in flames. His first thought, by his own account, was about his mother. His second thought was more tactical. He was going to be landing in enemy territory with every Serbian soldier, policeman, and civilian who'd seen that fireball in the sky now hunting for him. He needed to move, hide, and call for rescue faster than the search could organize itself. He landed, ran for a ditch he'd spotted on the way down, covered himself in mud, and got on his survival radio. The search was already beginning around him, flashlights, vehicles, voices in the dark. At one point, a dog came close enough that Zelko quietly drew his knife, calculating whether he could use it silently. He decided against it, reasoning that killing the dog would bring its owner running. He stayed still. The dog moved on. The rescue helicopter came in under fire conditions. His infrared strobe failed. He had one option left, a flare, bright, obvious, visible to everyone. He popped it anyway, then had to smother it in mud when the crew told him it was blinding their night vision. The helicopter landed, Zelko climbed aboard, and they lifted out of the field with seconds to spare before Serbian forces reached the landing site. Zoltán Dani and his crew remain, to this day, the only team in history to have shot down a stealth aircraft in combat. The wreck of Zelko's F-117 was never destroyed, and Serbian forces collected the pieces. Significant portions of that aircraft are still on display in the Museum of Aviation in Belgrade, a physical monument to the night the invisible became visible. Dani himself described the moment of impact as feeling like scoring the winning goal in a football match. And Zelko, in one of the most remarkable postscripts to any military engagement, spent years expressing a desire to meet the man who shot him down, not out of bitterness, but out of professional respect. He finally got that meeting in 2011, 12 years after the night they nearly killed each other. So what does this story actually teach us? It teaches us that no technology is a permanent solution. Every advantage eventually meets an adversary willing to think differently about the problem. The F-117's stealth capabilities were real, and they were revolutionary, but they were optimized against a specific threat, and Dani asked what happened if you changed the threat. He used physics that NATO had essentially dismissed as too imprecise to matter. It teaches us that complexity is its own vulnerability. The Nighthawk was so sophisticated that its bomb bay doors, the very mechanism of its mission, became the crack in its armor. And it teaches us that the most dangerous moment for any system, technological, institutional, or personal, is not when it's being challenged, it's when everyone has stopped imagining that it can be. Dani never stopped imagining. That's why one stormy night in 1999, the ghost came down.